Hey guys, tonight we begin with something truly unsettling. And no, it is not a haunted mansion or a creaky old attic. It is far worse. Tonight we are wandering through the most dangerous place in 1950s America, the average family home, the cheerful one. The one with the white picket fence, the shiny new appliances and enough hidden toxins to make a modern safety inspector faint, clean into his clipboard. Before we tiptoe past the radioactive dishware, a big and sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas genuinely shape what we make here, and this little channel only grows because of people like you tossing brilliant, slightly cursed suggestions into the comments. If you enjoy these late-night wanders through history, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is, because somehow it is always 2 a.m. somewhere. We're also now on Spotify, so if you would rather drift off with just your ears and no glowing screen, the link is waiting in the description. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, fluff your entirely asbestos-free pillow, and get comfortable. Let us pause for a moment and wonder. Did people in the 1950s know they were basically living inside a chemistry experiment? Was the glow from Grandpa's watch supposed to do that? Why did the wallpaper come with a warranty against insects? Could you survive a single evening in a home where the cigarettes were doctor recommended, the floor tiles were quietly lethal, and the refrigerator could trap you like a bear trap with a light bulb inside? Would you last one cocktail hour sipping from leaded crystal, while a space heater slowly filled the den with fumes? And now, congratulations. You have just woken up in 1958. The coffee is percolating, the radio is humming, everything is spotless and modern and brand new, and almost every single object around you is trying to kill you very politely. Welcome home. Let us begin with the walls, because you are surrounded by them and they seem harmless enough. That buttery yellow in the kitchen, the soft blue in the nursery, the glossy white trim your mother wipes down every Saturday until it gleams. It looks wonderful. It also happens to be loaded with lead, because in the 1950s lead was the secret ingredient that made paint brighter, tougher, and more washable. Nobody thought twice about it. The trouble is that lead paint does not stay politely on the wall forever. It chips, it flakes, it crumbles into a fine, faintly sweet-tasting dust. And small children, being small children, treat every windowsill like a snack bar. That sweetness is the cruel part. Lead paint genuinely tastes a little sugary, which means a toddler who gnaws on a painted crib rail is not being difficult. He is, from his own point of view, being rewarded. It is a bit like leaving candy on every surface in the house, and then acting surprised when the candy gets eaten. The paint chips look like nothing at all, small pale flakes gathering in the corners of the room, and the dust is invisible, settling on the floor where the baby crawls and then onto the baby's hands and then, inevitably, into the baby's mouth. You cannot see what it does. That is the quiet horror of lead. There is no rash, no cough, no dramatic moment where anyone clutches their chest and points an accusing finger at the trim. Instead, it works slowly, month after month, on the developing brain of a child, dimming the very things a parent most hopes to see brighten. A little one who was sharp becomes cloudy. A child who was calm becomes irritable and strange. And the family has no idea, because the walls are beautiful and freshly painted, and the paediatrician has never once mentioned the colour of the nursery. The walls are only the beginning, because lead in this era is not shy. It is in the paint, yes, but it is also in the pipes, in the gasoline, in the canned food, in the crystal, in the little painted soldiers the children line up on the rug. A child of the 1950s is marinating in it from every direction at once, and the wall is simply the friendliest looking source. It smiles down in cheerful pastels while it sheds. And here is the part that would make a modern renovator break out in a cold sweat. When a family decides the buttery yellow is dated and it is time for a fresh coat, they do the sensible thing. They sand the old paint down first to get a nice smooth surface. Sanding lead paint is roughly the same as loading it into a shotgun and firing it into the air of your own home, filling every room with a fine toxic fog that settles into the carpet, the curtains, and the lungs of everyone present. The family finishes the weekend project, admires the new colour, and never connects the headache to the handiwork. So the walls hold you gently on all four sides, warm and colourful and washable, quietly powdering the household with a metal that the human body was never meant to meet. It is decoration as slow sabotage, and if you think looking up will get you away from it, I have some genuinely unsettling news about the ceiling directly over your head. Now look up. Above your head is a ceiling, and depending on how modern your home is, it might be textured with that fashionable bumpy popcorn finish everyone suddenly wants. It hides imperfections, it muffles sound, it makes the living room feel a touch fancier. It is also, in a great many homes of this era, quietly packed with asbestos. Asbestos was the wonder material of the age, fireproof and cheap and stuffed into absolutely everything, and the ceiling was just one more happy home for it. As long as nobody ever disturbs it, sands it, drills it, or so much as looks at it wrong, you are perfectly fine. Which, in a house full of children and weekend home improvement enthusiasts, is a comforting thought indeed. Understand why everyone adores asbestos, because it genuinely is a remarkable material. It does not burn, it does not rot, it resists heat, chemicals, and the passage of time with the serene patience of a mountain. To a 1950s builder, it is a gift from the gods, a mineral you can spray, weave, mix and pack into any corner of a house to make that corner safer from fire. The irony, of course, is that in protecting the home from one dramatic danger, it introduces a much slower and quieter one, and the slow, quiet ones are always the hardest to notice. The ceiling looks like frozen sea foam, or, if you squint, like cottage cheese that made some poor life choices. It is entirely inert up there, doing nothing, harming no one, and it will happily continue doing nothing for decades. The whole arrangement depends on a single condition, which is that the material remains completely undisturbed. Asbestos only becomes dangerous when it is broken up, and its tiny fibres drift free into the air, where they are thin enough to be breathed deep into the lungs and sharp enough to stay there permanently. Intact, it is a sleeping thing. Disturbed, it wakes up. And a house is a place where things get disturbed constantly. Somebody wants to hang a plant from the ceiling and drills a hole. Somebody bumps the ceiling, moving a tall bookshelf. A leak in the roof softens a patch and it crumbles onto the sofa below. A child throws a ball indoors, which is forbidden, and it thumps the ceiling, which is exactly why it was forbidden, though for entirely different reasons than anyone stated. Each of these small domestic events sends up a puff of fibres no one can see. The truly grim mathematics of asbestos is the timeline. It does not make you sick that day, or that year, or even that decade. The illnesses it causes can take 30 or 40 years to surface, which means the fibres breathed in during a cheerful 1950s remodel do not present their bill until sometime in the 1980s or 90s. It is the most patient hazard in the entire house, a debt collector who is in absolutely no hurry, content to wait half a lifetime before knocking on the door. So the ceiling watches over the family, textured and stylish, and utterly still. A fireproof cloud that asks only to be left alone forever. And most of the time, It is. But asbestos is not content to live only in the ceiling. It has ambitions. It has spread throughout this house like a tenant who signed a very long lease, and our next stop is directly beneath your feet. Having survived the ceiling, let us consider the floor. Those handsome 9-inch tiles in the kitchen and basement, the ones in cheerful checkerboard patterns that make the whole room look like a diner, are a genuine marvel of durability. They resist water, they resist scuffs, they resist the passage of time itself. They resist all of this because a great many of them are made with asbestos too. The floor and the ceiling working together, quietly bracketing your entire family in fireproof mineral fibres. The tiles mostly behave, right up until one cracks, or until someone decides the checkerboard is dated and starts prying them up with a crowbar and a song in his heart. There is something almost admirable about how completely asbestos has colonised this house. You have it overhead in the popcorn texture and underfoot in the tile, and the family walks around in the narrow band of air between the two, blissfully unaware of being the filling in a fireproof sandwich. The tiles themselves are wonderful to live with. They shrug off spilled milk, dropped pots, muddy boots, and decades of foot traffic without complaint. A parent could not design a more practical surface for a busy home, which is precisely why they are everywhere, in kitchens and hallways and every basement rec room in America. The glue matters here too, because the tiles are stuck down with a black adhesive called cutback, and that adhesive is frequently loaded with asbestos as well. So even the stuff holding the floor to the floor is in on it. The tile and the mastic form a tidy little partnership, and as long as nobody disturbs either one, they will sit there in peaceful checkerboard harmony for the better part of a century, harming absolutely no one. You already know where this is going because you have met asbestos twice now, and you understand its one condition. Intact. The tile is a saint. But floor tile lives a much harder life than a ceiling. It gets walked on 10,000 times a day. Heavy furniture drags across it. Somebody drops a cast iron skillet and a tile cracks clean in half. Over the years, the pieces chip and grind at the edges, and each crack, each chip, each dragged sofa leg liberates a few more fibres into the air of the room where the family eats breakfast. The real fireworks, though, come at renovation time, which in the world of asbestos is another way of saying disaster time. A homeowner grows tired of the dated diner look and decides to modernise. He gets down on his knees with a scraper and a chisel and starts levering the old tiles up one by one, snapping them, shattering them, sanding the stubborn adhesive off the concrete beneath. He is, without the faintest idea, running a small asbestos processing operation in his own kitchen, filling the room with exactly the invisible fibres the intact tile had kept safely locked away. He finishes the weekend proud of his handiwork and completely unaware of what he has stirred loose. So you stand there in the cheerful checkerboard kitchen, a fireproof ceiling above and a fireproof floor below, perfectly safe as long as time itself stands still, and nobody ever picks up a tool. It never does, and they always do. But let us step away from the surfaces for a moment, because not every danger in this house merely sits still and waits. Some of them glow. On the nightstand sits your alarm clock, and it is a beautiful thing. In the pitch dark of night you can still read the time, because the numbers and hands glow a gentle, otherworldly green all on their own. No batteries, no switch, just a soft eternal shine. That shine is radium, a radioactive element painted onto the dial by workers who, in earlier decades, had suffered horribly for the privilege of making watches glow. By the 1950s, the glowing dial was simply normal, sitting on nightstands and wrists across the country, ticking away and very faintly irradiating the bedside table. It asks nothing of you. It just glows, all night, forever, whether you want it to or not. The glow really is lovely. There is something magical about a dial that makes its own light, a little green window into the dark that never needs winding or plugging in. To a child sneaking a look at the time, it seems almost enchanted, and in a way it is, if your definition of enchantment includes a steady trickle of ionizing radiation. The radium mixed into the paint decays constantly, and that decay is what excites the glowing compound and lights up the numbers. It is a nightlight powered by nuclear physics, sitting 18 inches from your sleeping head. To appreciate the full weight of this, you have to know about the women who painted these dials a generation earlier, because their story is one of the grimmer chapters of industrial history. They were told the radium paint was harmless. They painted tiny numbers with tiny brushes, and to keep the tips sharp they were instructed to point them with their lips, wetting the brush in their mouths hundreds of times a day, and swallowing a little radium each time. Many of them fell gravely ill in ways that were genuinely horrifying, and their suffering is a large part of why anyone eventually understood how dangerous the stuff was. And yet here it is, decades later, still glowing on the family nightstand as if none of that had happened. The clock on the mantel, the watch on father's wrist, the little dial on the bedroom alarm, all of them faintly radioactive, all of them considered perfectly ordinary household objects. Nobody is licking these particular dials, which helps enormously, so the danger to the sleeping family is real but modest, a small, constant companion rather than an immediate threat. It is the kind of hazard you can sleep right next to, which is fortunate, because that is exactly what everyone is doing. The genuinely unsettling detail is the word forever. That green glow does not fade on any human timescale. Radium keeps decaying for well over 1,000 years, which means a clock will still be mildly radioactive long after the house is gone, long after everyone who ever heard it tick has been forgotten. A modern collector who finds one of these clocks in an antique shop and waves a Geiger counter over it will hear it chatter with alarm, the little machine picking up a glow that has not dimmed one bit since the day it was made. It is a small, patient, deathless thing. So you lie in bed and watch the soft green numbers float in the dark, comforting and steady, keeping perfect time in a way that will outlast civilizations. It is the most harmless-looking object in the room. It is also quietly running an experiment on the nightstand that will not conclude for a millennium. And speaking of things the whole family cheerfully breathed in together, let us talk about the haze hanging over every single room. Somewhere in this house, probably in every single room, there is an ashtray and it is never empty. In 1950s America, the cigarette is not a guilty secret. It is an accessory, a comfort, a sign of good taste. People smoke at the dinner table, in the car, in the hospital, in bed, and right beside the crib. Best of all, the advertisements assure everyone it is perfectly fine, because more doctors reportedly smoke one particular brand than any other, and physicians in crisp white coats beam out from magazine pages recommending their favourite. The air in the living room is a soft blue haze and everyone breathes it in together, the whole family as a bonding activity. You cannot overstate how completely normal this is. Smoking is not something people sneak off to do. It is woven into every ordinary moment of the day, as unremarkable as pouring a cup of coffee. Guests are offered a cigarette the way you might offer a mint. Ashtrays are standard furnishing provided in offices, waiting rooms, airplanes and elevators, and a home without a lit cigarette in it feels somehow unwelcoming, as though the hosts are not quite comfortable in their own skin. The doctor angle is the part that lands hardest on a modern ear. Cigarette companies genuinely built entire campaigns around the endorsement of physicians, running surveys of dubious design, and then announcing that the medical profession preferred their brand. A man in a white coat and a stethoscope would gaze out from the page, calm and authoritative, essentially prescribing a pack a day. Some brands leaned on the idea that their particular cigarette was gentler on the throat, kinder to the sensitive smoker, practically a wellness product. It is a bit like your dentist recommending a nice hard caramel to strengthen the teeth, and the smoking does not pause for anything, least of all pregnancy or infancy. Expectant mothers smoke without a second thought, sometimes on the gentle advice that it will keep the weight down and the nerves steady. Cigarettes are lit in the maternity ward. A father paces the waiting room puffing away, and once the baby comes home, the smoke simply follows it, filling the nursery, the car, the kitchen. The infant breathes the same blue air as everyone else, because the concept that this might matter has not yet arrived in the popular mind. Here is the thing that makes it genuinely dark rather than merely quaint. By the 1950s, the evidence connecting smoking to lung cancer is beginning to stack up in the scientific literature, real studies with real alarming numbers, but that news travels slowly, and it runs headlong into an advertising machine of enormous power and charm, one that is very motivated to keep the doctor in the white coat smiling on the page. So the ashtrays stay full, the haze stays thick, and the reckoning, like so much else in this house, is quietly deferred to a later decade that will have to sort it all out. So the family gathers in the warm blue fog of the living room, passing the lighter, tapping ash into the good glass ashtray, entirely at ease, entirely poisoned, and entirely convinced by the man in the white coat that all is well. It is a group activity, a shared ritual, a thing done together in love. And if you think the plain cigarette was bad, wait until you hear what they did to the one that was supposed to be the healthy choice. Now here is a detail so grim, it almost sounds invented. In the early 1950s, one popular cigarette brand proudly introduced a revolutionary new filter, promising the greatest health protection in cigarette history. It was marketed to the health-conscious smoker, the one who wanted all the pleasure with less of the worry. The miracle filter was made, and I truly wish this were a joke from asbestos. So the careful smoker who chose the healthy option was drawing every breath through a fine mesh of one of the most dangerous minerals known to science, puffing away with the calm confidence of a man who had made a responsible decision. The company quietly changed the recipe after a few years. The damage did not unhappen. Sit with the logic of this for a moment, because it is a small masterpiece of the era. Word is starting to spread that cigarettes might be harmful, and consumers are growing a little nervous, and so a company steps forward with a solution. Not a suggestion to smoke less, of course. A better cigarette. A cigarette with a special filter that traps the bad parts and lets only the pleasant parts through, so you can keep smoking exactly as much as before, but now with a clear conscience. It is the same instinct that puts the word healthy on a candy bar. The filter is presented as a genuine advance, a triumph of modern science working on the smoker's behalf, and the material chosen for this triumph is asbestos, the very same fibrous mineral we have already found in the ceiling, the floor, and the ironing pad, a substance whose entire dangerous personality comes from tiny sharp fibres that lodge deep in the lungs and never leave. The one place in the entire world you would least want to install an asbestos component is inside a tube that a person sucks air through directly into their chest. That is where they put it. Whether the smoker actually inhaled loose fibres through the filter is a matter that has been argued about ever since, and the honest answer is that it was not exactly reassuring either way. The point that survives all the argument is the sheer breathtaking confidence of the thing. Here was a product sold specifically to the frightened, health-minded customer, the person trying to do the right thing, and the reward for that caution was a mouthful of the worst possible material, packaged as protection. Doing the responsible thing actively made it worse. This is the recurring joke of the 1950s home, if you can call it a joke, and it is worth naming plainly. Again and again, the safety feature is the hazard. The healthy option is the poison. The careful, sensible, well-informed choice leads directly into the trap because the information everyone is working from is simply wrong, and the people selling the solutions have every reason not to correct it. The cautious smoker and the reckless smoker end up in roughly the same place, except the cautious one paid a premium for the privilege. Eventually the company swapped the recipe for something less catastrophic and moved on, and the whole episode faded into an obscure footnote that sounds too absurd to be real when you first hear it. But it happened, exactly as described, sold openly on shelves as the smart choice. So the health-conscious smoker sits in his armchair, pleased with himself, drawing careful breaths through his special protective filter, having done everything right and nothing that helped. And now, having thoroughly poisoned the air, let us go looking for the medicine in the little cabinet on the bathroom wall. Wander into the bathroom now and open the little mirrored cabinet on the wall. Inside is a curated collection of small glass bottles and tins, and it is a museum of casual danger. There is mercurochrome and merthiolate, bright red and orange antiseptics that contain actual mercury, dabbed cheerfully onto every childhood scrape. There are barbiturates to help mother sleep and pep pills to help her get going again. There might be a bottle of paregoric, a tincture of opium kept on hand to soothe a teething baby or a fussy stomach. Everything is available. Nothing has a child-proof cap, and the whole cabinet is arranged at the perfect height for a curious 4-year-old standing on the edge of the tub. Start with the antiseptics because they are the friendliest looking horror in the box. Mercurochrome is a vivid, cheerful red, and it stings pleasingly when it goes on, which every child of the era interprets as proof that it is working. It gets painted onto scraped knees, cut fingers, and skinned elbows without a moment's hesitation, sometimes daily, and its active ingredient is a compound of mercury applied directly to broken skin. It is a bit like treating a paper cut with a substance you would now need a special license to dispose of. The bright red badge on the knee was practically a childhood uniform. Then there is the sleep and energy department, which runs the household on a chemical seesaw. Barbiturates are handed out generously to help with sleep and nerves, powerful sedatives with a genuinely narrow margin between the dose that helps and the dose that harms, especially when combined with the cocktail hour we will get to later. To counter the grogginess, there are amphetamines, cheerfully prescribed for energy, focus, and slimming down. A person could quite reasonably be taking something to speed up in the morning and something to slow down at night, riding the chemical elevator up and down each day with a doctor's blessing. The genuinely startling item is the paregoric. This is a tincture of opium, an actual opioid, sold with relative ease and kept in ordinary medicine cabinets for ordinary complaints. It is used to calm upset stomachs, and, most alarmingly, to quiet teething and colicky babies, a few drops to settle a crying infant into peaceful silence. The reason it works is exactly the reason it should terrify a modern parent, and yet it sat on the shelf as a sensible household remedy, right between the aspirin and the cough syrup. And nothing, absolutely nothing, is designed to keep children out. The child-resistant cap is years away from being required, so every bottle in the cabinet opens with a simple twist that a toddler can manage on the second or third try. The cabinet itself hangs at adult chest height, which is to say directly at eye level for a small child who has climbed up onto the sink or the edge of the bathtub to investigate. The bright colours, the sweet syrups, the little pills that look so much like candy, all of it sits waiting behind a mirror that a curious 4-year-old can reach. So the medicine cabinet gleams there on the wall, a tidy little pharmacy of mercury, sedatives, stimulants, and opium. None of it locked, all of it reachable. Offered up to whoever opens the mirror. It is meant to heal the family, and mostly it does, and occasionally it does something else entirely. But of all the quicksilver hazards in this bathroom, one is shinier and more tempting than the rest, and it lives inside a slender glass tube. When someone in the house feels feverish, out comes the thermometer, a slim glass wand with a shining silver thread running up the middle. That silver thread is liquid mercury, and it is genuinely mesmerizing, especially to children who are told very sternly not to bite down on the thermometer, and who therefore think about very little else. When a thermometer breaks, and they always eventually break, the mercury scatters into tiny quivering beads that roll across the floor like magic. The natural response of every child in history is to chase them, poke them, and try to herd the little beads back together with a fingertip, which is precisely the wrong thing to do with a neurotoxin, but nobody has mentioned that yet. Mercury is, it must be admitted, one of the most genuinely fascinating substances a child will ever encounter. It is a metal that is also a liquid, silver and heavy and alive-looking, rolling and splitting and merging with a mind of its own. It does not wet the surface, it rolls across the way water does. It beads up and races away, and when two beads touch they leap together into one, and then a poke splits them apart again into a dozen skittering droplets. To a curious kid, this is not a hazard. This is the single greatest toy in the house, briefly and thrillingly available. The thermometer itself is a fixture of every fever, tucked under the tongue, or, for the smallest patients, elsewhere, and held there while everyone waits, and the silver thread creeps up the scale. Being made of thin glass and being handled by sick, squirming, half-asleep people, it enjoys a short and eventful life. Sooner or later it slips from a hand or rolls off a nightstand or gets bitten despite the very stern instructions, and it shatters, releasing its bright cargo across the bathroom tile or the bedroom rug. What happens next is the problem. Nobody in the 1950s treats a broken thermometer as an emergency, because nobody knows to. The sensible parent gets a broom, or a rag, or simply a fingertip, and gathers up the pretty silver beads, and either throws them out or, in a very common bit of thrift, saves them in a little jar because they seem too interesting to waste. The child is often recruited to help with the fun of the roundup. Everyone handles it directly, and the beads that escape into the cracks of the floorboards stay there, quietly evaporating into the air of the room for years. That last part is the quiet catch. Mercury does not just sit there being shiny. At room temperature it slowly gives off an invisible, odourless vapour, and that vapour is the truly dangerous form, breathed in without anyone noticing and going to work on the nervous system. A single broken thermometer worked into the gaps of a warm bedroom floor can off-gas for a very long time. A small persistent haze that no one can see or smell, seasoning the air of the room where a child sleeps. The visible beads are the memorable part. The invisible vapour is the part that lingers. So the thermometer does its honest work, measuring fevers and bringing a little certainty to a worried household, right up until the day it breaks and turns the bathroom floor into a scattering of magical silver beads that everyone rushes to touch. It is danger disguised as delight, the most enchanting hazard in the entire home. But you do not need a broken thermometer to get a quiet dose of metal in this house. Sometimes it comes straight out of the tap. Let us get a nice cold glass of water from the tap, because staying hydrated is important. The water is clear, it is cold, it is refreshing, and depending on your plumbing it may be gently seasoned with lead. Many homes of this era have lead pipes, or copper pipes joined together with lead solder, and the water sits inside them overnight, quietly picking up a little something extra. Nobody can see it, smell it, or taste it, so nobody worries about it. You fill the baby's bottle from that same tap, boil the vegetables in that same water, and brew the morning coffee with it, all without the faintest idea that the pipes themselves are a slow and patient ingredient. Lead has been used for plumbing for an extraordinarily long time, so long that the very word plumbing comes from the Latin for lead, a bit of etymological honesty that nobody in the kitchen is thinking about. It is a wonderful metal for pipes in every way except the one that matters. It is soft, it bends easily around corners, it resists leaks, and it lasts for generations. Whole cities are plumbed with it, and the service line bringing water into the house from the street is very often lead as well, so the metal greets the water before it even arrives. The chemistry is simple and unhurried. Water is a patient solvent, and when it sits still inside a lead pipe or against a lead-soldered joint for hours, as it does every night while the family sleeps, it slowly dissolves a small amount of the metal into itself. Soft water and acidic water do it faster. Hot water does it faster than cold, and the first draw of the morning, the water that has been sitting in the pipes all night, carries the heaviest dose. That is, naturally, the water used for the morning coffee and the baby's first bottle. The reason nobody worries is that lead in water is completely undetectable to a human being. There is no cloudiness, no colour, no odour, no strange taste, nothing whatsoever to warn you. The water from a heavily leaded pipe looks exactly as pure and inviting as water from the cleanest spring, glinting in the glass perfectly clear. Every sense you have reports that it is fine. Only a laboratory could tell you otherwise, and nobody is sending their tap water to a laboratory, because why on earth would they? The water looks great, and it goes everywhere, because water goes everywhere. It fills the drinking glasses and the ice cube trays. It boils the pasta and the potatoes and the eggs, and boiling, incidentally, does nothing to remove lead, and can even concentrate it as the water steams away. It mixes the powdered formula for the infant, who is the most vulnerable member of the household to exactly this metal. The whole family drinks it, cooks with it, and grows up on it. A small, steady dose delivered through the most innocent and necessary substance in the house. So you drink your cold, clear glass of water, wholesome and pure by every appearance, quietly flavoured by the pipes it travelled through to reach you. It is the simplest thing in the world, water from the tap, and it is one more patient contributor to the household's invisible metal diet. And once that water has done its work, it is time to set that same table for dinner, where the plates themselves have a surprise of their own. Time to set the table, and here is where the 1950s truly outdoes itself. The dinnerware is gorgeous, glossy ceramic in bold, saturated colours, the pride of many a kitchen cupboard. Some of the most beloved pieces, particularly the vivid reds, oranges and yellows, get their brilliant glaze from uranium oxide. Yes, that uranium. These plates and bowls are mildly radioactive, cheerful little saucers sitting in the cabinet and holding your mashed potatoes. Under normal use, they mostly keep their radiation to themselves, though acidic foods can coax a bit of uranium out into the meal. Nobody frets. The plates are pretty, they're durable, and if you happen to own a Geiger counter, dinner becomes the most exciting event of the week. The colour really is spectacular, and that is the whole point. Uranium oxide mixed into a ceramic glaze produces reds and oranges of a depth and warmth that were genuinely hard to achieve any other way, a glowing tomato red that seems lit from within. Manufacturers used it because it made beautiful dishes, and families bought those dishes because they brightened the table, and the fact that the pigment came from the same element that would soon be splitting in reactors did not enter into anyone's thinking. It was simply the colour that looked best with the roast. These are not obscure collector's items either. They are everyday dishes, the kind stacked in ordinary cupboards and pulled out for ordinary suppers, produced in enormous quantities and beloved for their cheerful practicality. A famous line of this pottery, prized for its bright hues, sat on countless American tables, and its most radioactive shade was fittingly the boldest one. The plate holding the pot roast, the little bowl holding the peas, the serving dish at the centre of the table, all of them faintly humming along with the background of the room. For the most part, the danger here is genuinely modest, and it is only fair to say so. The uranium is locked into the glaze, and simply eating off the plate exposes a person to only a small amount of radiation, far less dramatic than the colour would lead you to fear. The dishes sit in the cabinet, radiating gently and mostly keeping it to themselves. This is one of the milder hazards in the house, more a curiosity than a catastrophe, which by the standards of everything else we have toured tonight practically makes it health food. The catch, and there is always a catch, involves what the plates are actually for, which is holding food. When the food is acidic, a tangy tomato sauce, a squeeze of lemon, a helping of sauerkraut, the acid can leach a little of the uranium right out of the glaze and into the meal itself. So the more flavourful and zesty the dinner, the more the plate contributes an ingredient that was never on the recipe card. The beautiful red glaze that made the plate so appealing is precisely the part that ends up, in trace amounts, on the fork. So the table is set, gleaming with colour, the boldest reds and oranges catching the dining room light, every place setting a small cheerful sauce, ticking quietly away beneath the gravy. It is the prettiest dinnerware in the neighbourhood, and it will still set off an instrument decades from now in a stranger's kitchen. But of all the appliances gleaming in this modern kitchen, none is prouder, larger, or more quietly dangerous to a small child than the great humming box in the corner, and that is exactly where we are headed next. Step over to the crown jewel of the modern kitchen, the refrigerator, humming proudly in the corner and keeping the milk cold. It is a wonderful machine with one memorable flaw. Its door latches shut with a heavy mechanical handle that can only be opened from the outside. This is fine for the milk. It is considerably less fine for children, who love to climb into enclosed spaces during games of a hide-and-seek, and who discover too late that an airtight box which cannot be opened from within is a terrible place to hide. The problem became common enough that in 1956 the government passed an entire law requiring refrigerator doors to open from the inside. Until then, the family fridge was a beautiful, gleaming, occasionally fatal trap. The latch itself is a point of pride, a solid chrome handle that closes with a satisfying vault-like thunk. It seals so well precisely because it is engineered to. A good tight seal keeps the cold in and the warm out, which is exactly what you want from an icebox and exactly what you do not want from a hiding place. The door does not have a simple gasket you can shove open from within. It has a mechanical catch, and that catch only surrenders to a hand on the outside pulling the handle. Now consider the other great feature of the era, which is that refrigerators are getting bigger, and older ones are constantly being replaced and discarded. The retired unit does not vanish. It gets hauled out to the back porch, the garage, the alley, or the empty lot down the street, where it sits with its door still firmly latched, waiting. To a child, an abandoned refrigerator in a vacant lot is not junk. It is a fort, a spaceship, a submarine, and above all the finest hiding spot ever devised, roomy and dark and completely concealing. So the child climbs in and pulls the door shut, and the satisfying thunk that the whole family loves seals behind him. From the inside there is no handle, no latch, no way to push against that engineered catch. The seal that keeps milk fresh keeps air out just as faithfully. And a child in an airtight box has a very limited supply of it. The hiding spot that seemed so perfect becomes, in a matter of minutes, something no game was ever meant to become, and the silence outside is mistaken by the other players for a hider who is simply very good at the game. This was not a rare freak accident that happened once or twice. It happened often enough, and grievously enough, that the entire United States government took notice and did something about it, passing a federal law in 1956 specifically requiring that refrigerator doors be openable from the inside. When a nation writes a statute about your kitchen appliance, you can be certain the appliance had earned it. The fix, once it came, was elegantly simple. A switch to magnetic door gaskets that hold firmly but yield to a gentle push from within, so a trapped child can simply lean on the door and tumble out. But that fix arrived in the middle of the decade, and it took years for the old latching models to cycle out of homes and porches and vacant lots. Until then, the gleaming pride of the modern kitchen doubled as one of the few objects in the house capable of catching a child and refusing to let go. So it hums there in the corner, spotless and cold and beautiful, keeping the milk perfect. And once you have finished admiring it, kneel down and open the cabinet just beside it, because the danger there does not even bother to disguise itself as an appliance. Kneel down and open the cabinet beneath the kitchen sink, that dark little cavern where the cleaning supplies live. It is an unregulated chemistry lab guarded by nothing but a flimsy door and blind optimism. There is bleach, there is ammonia, and there is the folk wisdom that mixing cleaners together makes them stronger, which is how kitchens across the country occasionally filled with toxic chloramine gas. There is carbon tetrachloride, a popular spot remover and stain fighter that happens to poison your liver and, when heated, transforms into something close to nerve gas. None of these bottles have safety caps, the warning labels are minimal, and every single one is stored at toddler eye level in a rainbow of tempting colours. Start with the classic pairing of bleach and ammonia, two cleaners found in nearly every kitchen, each useful and each reasonably manageable on its own. The trouble begins with a piece of household reasoning so common it is almost universal, the idea that if one cleaner works well, then two mixed together must work twice as well. A person tackling a stubborn stain reaches for the bleach, gets nowhere, and then reaches for the ammonia to really finish the job. The two react, and the reaction produces chloramine vapour, which fills the small closed room with a gas that burns the eyes and lungs, and sends the ambitious cleaner staggering for a window. Then there is carbon tetrachloride, which deserves special mention because it was trusted so completely. It is a superb solvent, cutting through grease and grease spots and stains on clothing with ease, and it was sold as a household spot remover and even used to recharge fire extinguishers. People sloshed it around freely on collars and carpets, breathing the fumes in poorly ventilated rooms without a second thought. It is toxic to the liver and kidneys with repeated exposure, and in a genuinely cruel twist, when it meets heat or flame it can break down into phosgene, the same gas used as a chemical weapon in the First World War. So the fire extinguisher fluid could, under the wrong conditions, generate poison gas. Beyond these headliners, there is a whole supporting cast crammed into the cabinet, a jumble of lye-based drain openers strong enough to dissolve tissue, oven cleaners nearly as fierce, solvents, polishes, and mystery liquids decanted into unmarked jars for convenience and then forgotten. The labels that do exist tend to be cheerful and vague, more interested in promising a sparkling kitchen than in explaining what the contents might do to a person. Warnings are an afterthought, printed small if at all, because the assumption of the era is that a sensible adult will simply use the product sensibly. and every bit of it lives at the worst possible height. The cabinet beneath the sink is low, dark, easy to open, and situated at precisely the eye level of a crawling, toddling, endlessly curious small child. The bottles are often brightly coloured. Some of the liquids inside are vivid blues and greens and ambers, and to a young child a colourful liquid in an easy-to-open bottle is not a hazard but a beverage. There are no child-resistant caps to slow them down, because those, like so many protections in this house, have not yet been invented or required. So the little door swings open at the lightest tug, revealing a low shelf packed with some of the most dangerous substances in the entire home, uncapped, brightly coloured, and arranged at grabbing height. It is a poison cabinet in everything but name, defended by nothing more than the hope that no one small ever gets curious. And if you think the chemicals stayed politely under the sink, wait until you see what the family cheerfully sprayed all over everything else. Every home in 1950s, America is engaged in a cheerful war against insects, and the weapon of choice is DDT. It comes in spray cans, in powders, in foggers you set off in a closed room, and it is applied with tremendous enthusiasm. People spray it on the kitchen counters, along the baseboards, over the picnic blanket, and directly onto their own children to ward off mosquitoes at the summer barbecue. The advertisements show smiling housewives misting the pantry, and a beaming cartoon character singing about how DDT is good for me. It is genuinely effective at killing bugs. It is also quietly building up in everything it touches, including the people doing the spraying, but that is a problem for a later decade. To be fair to DDT, it arrived as a genuine hero, and it is worth understanding why people loved it so much. During the war, it saved enormous numbers of lives by wiping out the mosquitoes and lice that spread malaria and typhus, and it worked with a thoroughness that seemed almost miraculous. A little of it killed the bugs, and it kept killing them for weeks afterward, and it did not seem to bother people at all in the doses they encountered. To a generation that had watched insects spread disease and ruin crops, this looked like an unambiguous triumph of science. So it came home from the war and settled into domestic life with wild enthusiasm. It went into aerosol bombs you could set off to fumigate a whole room, into powders you dusted along the baseboards, into sprays for the garden and the kitchen and the family dog. Homemakers misted it over the counters where food was prepared. Farmers coated their fields with it. Whole neighbourhoods were sprayed from trucks that rolled slowly down the street trailing white fog, and children, delighted, ran along behind the truck playing in the cloud like it was a summer sprinkler. The advertising leaned into the friendliness hard. Cheerful cartoon characters assured everyone that the spray was safe and pleasant. One memorable jingle having a bug and a housewife and a farmer all happily singing that DDT was good for them. Products bragged about how liberally you could apply it. There was no sense of caution at all, no small print urging restraint, because the prevailing belief was that this stuff killed insects and left people entirely alone, a perfect poison that somehow knew the difference. The catch, the one that would eventually rewrite the whole story, is that DDT does not break down and go away. It lingers in the soil, in the water, in the fatty tissue of every animal that absorbs it, building up quietly over time. It works its way up the food chain, concentrating as it goes, thinning the eggshells of birds and accumulating in the bodies of the people who so cheerfully sprayed it around their homes. The stuff that seemed to vanish after killing the bugs was actually just going somewhere else, patiently and staying there. That reckoning, though, belongs to the 1960s, when a careful book would finally connect the silent spring to the miracle spray. Here in the 1950s, none of that has landed yet. The family sprays with a clear conscience, dusting the pantry, fogging the bedroom, misting the children at the cookout, secure in the promise that it is good for them. So the war on insects rages on, victorious and cheerful and thoroughly saturating everything the family owns. And if spraying it by hand feels like too much bother, do not worry, because the walls of the nursery have volunteered to do the job for you. And if spraying the poison by hand feels like too much effort, do not worry, because industry has a solution. Wallpaper that arrives preloaded with insecticide, marketed especially for the nursery. This charming wallpaper is printed with cheerful cartoon animals and impregnated with DDT, so that it slowly releases bug killer into the room around the clock. The idea is that baby sleeps soundly, while the walls themselves keep the flies and mosquitoes away. What the walls are also doing is gently off-gassing pesticide over a sleeping infant every single night, which was considered at the time a thoughtful and modern convenience. The little ducks and bunnies on the wall looked adorable. They were also on active chemical duty. The pitch behind this product is, in its own way, a perfect little snapshot of the era's thinking. Insects are a nuisance and a health concern, and a nursery is a place you want kept clean and pest-free. And DDT is the trusted miracle that handles insects. So why make a busy mother stand there spraying the room every day when the room could simply be built to spray itself, quietly and continuously, forever? It is convenience layered on top of confidence, the logic of a time that saw pesticide the way we might see a nice air freshener. The wallpaper itself is genuinely sweet to look at, which is the unsettling part. It is decorated with the gentle imagery of childhood, smiling ducks, hopping bunnies, little cartoon animals in soft colours, exactly the sort of thing a loving parent would choose to make a baby's room feel warm and safe. Nobody putting it up is thinking about chemistry. They're thinking about how darling it looks above the crib, and they're being reassured that it will keep the bugs off their child as a bonus. And it works the way it is designed to, which is the trouble. The DDT worked into the paper does not stay locked in place. It slowly releases into the air of the small enclosed room, hour after hour, day after day, so that the space is perpetually holding a low haze of insecticide. The room where the family's most vulnerable member spends the most time, sleeping 10 or 12 hours a day with developing lungs, is the very room selected for continuous chemical treatment. The infant breathes it in every night steadily, from the walls decorated to comfort him. There is a grim efficiency to it that the era genuinely admired. Why treat the room when you can make the room the treatment? The same instinct that put insecticide in wallpaper would put it in shelf liners and paints and other quiet corners of the home, the idea being that protection is best when it is invisible and automatic and never needs thinking about. It never occurred to the makers or the buyers that automatic and invisible and constant are also the exact qualities you would least want in a poison surrounding a crib. So the nursery is finished, wallpapered in smiling animals, cheerful and clean and modern, the walls themselves standing guard against every fly and mosquito day and night. The baby sleeps beneath the ducks and bunnies, breathing steadily, and the room does its quiet chemical work around him, exactly as advertised. It is one of the purest examples in the whole house of a danger dressed up as devotion. But not every hazard in this home is invisible and patient. Some of them are large, loud, and mechanically eager to grab hold of you, and one of them is waiting down in the laundry. Down in the laundry area sits the wringer washing machine, a proud labour-saving device with a genuine appetite for human limbs. After the wash cycle, each piece of clothing is fed by hand between two rollers that squeeze the water out, and those rollers are strong, tireless, and utterly indifferent to what they are pulling in. A distracted moment, a loose sleeve, a curious child reaching up, and suddenly a hand is being drawn into the machine, followed by the wrist, followed by the arm. Emergency rooms of the era knew the injury so well they had a nickname for it. The machine didn't mean anything by it. It simply could not tell the difference between a wet towel and a 5-year-old, and it never slowed down to ask. The wringer washer is, to be clear, a genuine improvement over what came before, and homemakers are grateful for it. Instead of wringing every soaked garment out by hand, twisting and straining over a wash tub, you feed the laundry through 2 rollers that press the water out mechanically. It saves time, it saves aching wrists, and it gets the clothes far drier before they go on the line. It is, by the standards of laundry day, a marvel, and it sits proudly in basements and back porches across the country. The rollers are the whole point and also the whole problem. They turn steadily and grip firmly, because they need to grip firmly to squeeze the water out of heavy wet fabric, and they have absolutely no way of distinguishing fabric from anything else. Whatever enters the gap between them, they pull through, patiently and completely. A shirt goes in, and the rollers draw it steadily inward, and if the person feeding it in lets their fingers drift too close, the rollers accept the fingers with the same calm enthusiasm they showed the shirt. Once the hand is caught, the machine simply keeps doing its job. The rollers draw the fingers in, then the hand, then the wrist, then the forearm, flattening as they go, because they cannot feel resistance and they will not stop for a scream. The victim's instinct is to pull back, which does nothing, or to reach across with the other hand to help, which is how you occasionally end up with both arms in the machine. There is a release mechanism, but a person in sudden pain and panic does not always find it, and a child certainly does not. Children are the ones this happens to most, and most heartbreakingly. Laundry day is a busy time with a machine that looks fascinating, all turning rollers and sloshing water, and a curious child helping mother, or simply reaching up to touch the interesting moving parts, is drawn into a device built to pull things in. The injury was common enough and distinctive enough that doctors and nurses recognised it on sight and had a grim shorthand name for the mangled arm that came through the door, a nickname earned through sheer repetition. So the wringer washer stands there in the laundry area, honestly useful and genuinely appreciated, saving the family real labour every single week, asking only that no one ever let their attention, or their sleeve, or their child stray too close to the rollers. It is one of the few hazards in this house with actual moving parts and a real mechanical grip, a danger you can watch happening in real time. And right beside it waits a quieter companion, one that does its damage not by grabbing you, but by the material it is quietly made of. Near the washer waits the ironing board. An ironing is a daily ritual performed with a heavy metal iron heated to a truly punishing temperature, to keep from scorching the board and to rest the hot iron safely. Homemakers use a special pad and iron rest, prized for the way it shrugs off heat without so much as browning. It shrugs off heat because it is made of asbestos, that same miracle mineral turning up yet again, this time woven into the very cloth beneath the Sunday shirts. Every press of the iron, every shift of the pad sends up a faint whisper of fibres into the laundry room air, invisible and patient, while the shirts come out beautifully crisp. Ironing in this era is not a light task done now and then. It is a serious and frequent chore, because the fabrics of the day wrinkle enthusiastically, and the standards of a well-kept home are high. Shirts, dresses, tablecloths, handkerchiefs and sheets all pass under the iron, and the iron itself is a heavy slab of metal heated until it is genuinely dangerous to touch. A homemaker stands at that board for long stretches, pressing and steaming, and she needs surfaces around her that can take that heat without smoking, scorching or catching fire. This is precisely the problem asbestos was born to solve, and so, once again, it turns up exactly where heat lives. The ironing board pad is often made with it, woven into a heat-proof cloth that laughs off the touch of the iron. The little iron rest, the stand where you park the scorching iron between garments, is frequently asbestos too. Sometimes a moulded pad you could set the iron face down on without a worry. There are even asbestos ironing mats and sleeve boards, an entire small ecosystem of heat-proof helpers, and every one of them earns its keep by being made of the fireproof fibre. You already know the one rule of asbestos, and the ironing board breaks it gently but constantly. The pad is not sealed away behind a wall or locked into a floor tile. It is a working textile, handled directly, pressed on, folded, shifted, and rubbed by the hot iron dozens of times in a single session. Cloth like this wears. It frays at the edges, it thins where the iron passes most, and as it wears it releases its fibres, a little at a time, into the still air of the laundry room right in the breathing space of the person doing the pressing. The homemaker at the board has no reason to suspect any of it. The pad is doing its job admirably. The iron glides, the shirts come out crisp and smooth, and there is a real satisfaction in a basket of freshly pressed laundry. Nothing about the work suggests danger beyond the obvious hot metal, and the obvious hot metal is respected. The invisible fibres rising from the worn pad announce nothing. They do not smell, they do not sting, they simply drift and settle, and in some cases are breathed in and kept. So the ironing board waits with its cosy heat-proof pad, humble and helpful, turning out the neat pressed clothes that a proper household demands, quietly shedding a little of itself into the air with every stroke. It is asbestos in perhaps its most domestic and least suspected disguise, a danger hiding inside a chore. And now let us leave the laundry entirely and head down into the basement, where the true heart of the house labours in the dark and breathes out something you will never smell coming. Let us descend into the basement, where the heart of the home labours away in the dark. The furnace. Depending on the age of the house, it may burn coal, oil or gas, and it keeps the whole family cosy through the winter. It also produces carbon monoxide, an odourless, colourless, entirely undetectable gas that quietly seeps out whenever the furnace is cracked, clogged or poorly vented. There is no alarm to warn anyone because carbon monoxide detectors are decades away from the average home. If the gas builds up, the family simply grows sleepy, then sleepier, drifting off together in a warm house on a cold night, never quite understanding why. The furnace is not malicious. It is just doing its job in a room where no one is checking on it. The furnace earns real gratitude, and it should. It is the reason the house is warm when the wind howls outside, the reason the family is not huddling around a single hearth the way their grandparents did. It burns its fuel down in the basement and sends warmth up through the whole house, tirelessly, all winter long. It is one of the great comforts of modern living, and like most of the great comforts in this house, it comes with a quiet condition attached that nobody is quite watching closely enough. The danger is a matter of chemistry, and it is a sneaky one. Any fire that burns fuel produces carbon monoxide, especially when it is not getting enough fresh air to burn cleanly, and the furnace is a fire that burns continuously in an enclosed space. Under normal conditions, that exhaust goes safely up a flue and out of the house. But flues clog with soot, heat exchangers crack with age, vents get blocked, and burners run dirty. And any of these ordinary failures can let the exhaust drift back into the house instead of out of it. The furnace does not signal that anything has changed. It keeps running exactly as before. What makes carbon monoxide so uniquely frightening is that it hides from every sense a human being has. It has no colour, so you cannot see it gathering. It has no smell, so you cannot catch the warning whiff that a gas leak or a smouldering fire would give you. It has no taste and causes no immediate sting. It simply accumulates, invisible and silent, in the air the family is breathing, and the body has no way to detect that the air has quietly turned against it. The way it harms is almost gentle, which is the cruelest part. Carbon monoxide slips into the blood and takes the place where oxygen belongs, so the body slowly starves for air without any sense of struggle. The first symptoms feel like nothing much: a headache, a wave of drowsiness, a bit of confusion, the sort of thing a person shrugs off and blames on a long day. On a cold night, with everyone already tired and tucked into a warm house, the natural response to feeling sleepy is simply to sleep. And so the family drifts off, deeper and deeper, and the furnace hums on, faithful and unaware. And there is nothing in the house to interrupt any of this, because the carbon monoxide detector that would one day sit on every hallway ceiling has not yet arrived in ordinary homes. There is no beep, no flashing light, no shrill alarm to wake the sleepers and send them stumbling for a window. The only protection is a person noticing something is wrong in time, which is a great deal to ask of a household already growing drowsy from the very thing they need to notice. So the furnace breathes in the dark, warm and faithful and utterly silent about what it is doing. And for the rooms it cannot reach, the family turns to a smaller helper with an open flame and an appetite of its own. For rooms the furnace cannot reach, there is the portable space heater, and it burns kerosene or gas with an open glowing flame right there in the middle of the den. It is wonderfully warm. It is also busily consuming the oxygen in the room and exhaling fumes, and it will happily set fire to any curtain, newspaper, or dozing house cat that drifts too close. Families gather around it on chilly evenings, drying mittens on its casing and pulling their chairs in tight, trusting a small open flame in a closed room the way you might trust a sleeping tiger. Most nights nothing happens. The heater only ever needed one careless night, one knocked-over unit, one forgotten flame to make the whole evening memorable. The appeal of the space heater is immediate and obvious. Central heating is wonderful, but it does not warm every corner equally, and there is always a chilly back bedroom or a drafty den that the furnace never quite reaches. The portable heater solves that in minutes. You carry it into the cold room, light it up, and suddenly there is a pocket of real warmth to huddle in. On a bitter evening, gathered close around its cheerful glow, the family could not be more pleased with the little machine. But the little machine is doing two dangerous things at once, quietly, the whole time it is running. The first is breathing the same air the family is. An open flame needs oxygen to burn, and in a small closed room with the doors shut and the windows sealed against the cold, the heater and the people are drawing from the same limited supply. As it burns, it consumes the oxygen and, like the furnace, gives off carbon monoxide. So a room heated this way and sealed up tight can slowly turn stuffy, then heavy, then genuinely dangerous, all while feeling perfectly cozy. The second danger is far more direct, and it is simply that the thing is an open flame sitting out in the middle of a room full of flammable objects. There are curtains that stir in the draught. There are newspapers and magazines left on the floor, a tablecloth hanging low, a stack of laundry, a dozing pet, a child's toy, the leg of an armchair. Any of them brought too close or fallen against the heater can catch, and a space heater is easy to knock over, a stumble in the dark or an excited pet or a running child sending it toppling onto the rug, where the flame meets the carpet and the evening changes entirely. People treat it with a familiarity that would horrify a modern fire marshal. They drape wet mittens and socks over it to dry, inches from the flame. They pull chairs and blankets right up against it to soak in the heat. They leave it running unattended when they step out of the room, and most dangerously of all, they leave it burning through the night in the bedroom, an open flame quietly working while the whole family sleeps, and no one is awake to notice if anything goes wrong. The heater does not judge, it simply keeps burning wherever it is set, and most of the time it behaves, which is exactly what lulls everyone. Night after night the heater warms the room and nothing bad happens, and that long stretch of good luck teaches the family to trust it, to grow casual, to stop thinking of the flame as a flame. That is the trap. The heater is not dangerous most nights. It is dangerous the one night something goes wrong, and it only needs the one. So the family basks in the glow, safe and warm and comfortable, right up until the evening it becomes unforgettable. And the flame in the den has plenty of hidden company, because tucked inside the very walls around them runs a nervous system that was never built for the life this family is asking it to lead. Hidden inside the walls, behind all that cheerful lead paint, runs the electrical wiring, and in an older 1950s home it is a genuine adventure. Many houses still use knob and tube wiring, its conductors wrapped in cloth and rubber that dries, cracks and crumbles with age. The system was never designed for the modern household's growing army of appliances, so families cheerfully plug the new television, the toaster, the mixer, and 3 lamps into a single overloaded circuit and wait to see what happens. Fuses blow, so people helpfully replace them with a copper penny to stop the annoyance, which defeats the entire purpose of the fuse and turns the wall into kindling. The house is wired for a simpler time, and it is being asked to do far, far more. Knob and tube wiring was, in its day, a perfectly sensible system, and it is worth understanding what it was built for. It strings wires through the house on ceramic knobs and tubes, keeping the conductors spaced out in open air, and it worked well for the modest electrical needs of an earlier home, a few light bulbs and not much else. Nobody who installed it was foolish. They simply built for the demands of their own time, which included almost none of the electrical appliances that would soon come flooding into the American home. The problem is age, and time is not kind to the materials involved. The wires are insulated not with modern durable coatings, but with cloth and rubber, and over the decades that insulation dries out, grows brittle, cracks and flakes away, leaving bare conductors closer and closer to exposed. Behind a wall, where no one can see it, the protective covering slowly disintegrates while the wire keeps carrying current. What was safe when it was installed becomes, quietly and invisibly, a great deal less so with every passing year. Onto this aging system, the 1950s dumps an unprecedented load. Suddenly there are televisions, toasters, mixers, refrigerators, radios, vacuum cleaners, and lamps in every room. An explosion of gadgets all wanting power at once. The old wiring, built for a couple of light bulbs, is asked to feed a household hungry for electricity, and families think nothing of chaining several power-hungry devices onto a single circuit by way of a tangle of adapters and extension cords. The wires heat up under the strain, more than they were ever meant to, warming inside the walls where no one can feel them. This is exactly the disaster the fuse was invented to prevent, and this is where the era's ingenuity turns actively suicidal. When a circuit is overloaded, the fuse is supposed to blow, cutting the power and forcing everyone to stop before the wires overheat and ignite. But a blown fuse is annoying. It means a trip to the basement and the bother of a replacement, and it keeps happening because the circuit is genuinely overloaded. So the clever solution, passed around as a handy household tip, is to put a copper penny behind the fuse. The penny conducts happily, the fuse never blows again, and the one safety device standing between the overloaded wire and a house fire has been cheerfully disabled to stop the interruptions. So the walls hum with current they were never designed to carry, wrapped in insulation crumbling with age, guarded by a safety system, a penny is quietly switched off. The house looks calm and modern on the outside, all gleaming appliances and fresh paint, while inside its walls it is being pushed well past what it was ever built to endure. It is a slow risk that mostly waits patiently, though it grows most eager at exactly the time of year when the family piles the most demands upon it, and that season has arrived, glittering and beloved and more flammable than any other. Come December, the 1950s home transforms into the most flammable season of the year. Some families set up a gleaming aluminum Christmas tree, a metal tree, which they then drape in electric lights, an arrangement so obviously hazardous that a separate coloured spotlight had to be invented just to avoid electrocuting the family. The branches are dusted with angel hair for a snowy effect, and that angel hair is spun glass, or in earlier years, asbestos fibres, applied by hand and shed onto the carpet below. Cotton batting stands in for snow beneath the tree, positioned near candles and hot bulbs, and everything twinkles merrily. It is beautiful. It is also, structurally speaking, a bonfire waiting patiently under a pile of presents. Consider first the tree itself, because the era offered two options and both had their charms. The traditional choice is a real evergreen, cut weeks before Christmas and kept in a warm, dry house for the entire season, slowly drying into what is essentially a large piece of kindling shaped like a tree. The modern choice is the dazzling aluminum tree, a shimmering silver creation of metal branches, the height of space-age style. It solved the drying problem elegantly by not being alive, and introduced a new one by being made entirely of metal. The metal tree and electric lights do not mix, which the era grasped just well enough to invent a workaround rather than abandon the idea. Stringing electric lights across a conductive metal tree is a fine way to electrify the whole thing if any wire frays, so the accepted solution was not to skip the lights, but to skip putting them on the tree at all. Instead, a colour wheel, a rotating disc of coloured gels lit by a spotlight, sat on the floor and washed the silver branches in shifting hues of red, blue, green and gold. The tree glowed with colour, and for once nobody got a shock, which counts as a genuine safety triumph by the standards of this house. The decorations, though, undo any progress. Angel hair, the fine wispy strands draped over the branches to suggest a delicate frost, is spun glass, and handling it leaves tiny glass fibres in the skin of whoever decorates the tree, an itchy, irritating gift that keeps on giving. In earlier years, the same effect had been achieved with asbestos, our old friend, shredded fine and laid on by hand, drifting down onto the carpet and the presents below. Draping the tree in frost meant draping the living room in a fine mineral shed nobody thought twice about. Then comes the snow, because a tree needs snow beneath it, and the snow of choice is cotton batting, heaped around the base to look like a soft winter drift. Cotton batting is extremely flammable, and it is arranged directly beneath and around a tree strung with hot electric bulbs, and near the candles that many homes still light for that warm old-fashioned glow. Add the dried-out evergreen option, the overloaded electrical circuits already straining under the year's heaviest demand, and the penny sitting behind the fuse, and the whole cheerful tableau becomes a carefully assembled fire hazard with presents stacked on top. And it all looks wonderful, which is the point and the trap together. The tree shimmers under its rotating rainbow, the frost glints on the branches, the snow lies soft around the base, the whole room glows with the warmth and magic of the season. It is one of the happiest sights in the entire year, and it is also, coldly assessed, the most combustible arrangement the family will ever build indoors, tucked into a corner and left glowing through the night. So the home twinkles its way through December, beautiful and beloved and quietly primed. And once the family finally heads up to bed, glowing from the festivities, They change into the one thing in the house, even more eager to catch fire than the tree they left downstairs. Tuck the children into bed and consider what they're wearing. Their cozy flannel pajamas and the fuzzy sweaters they wore all day are made of fabrics that catch fire with alarming eagerness. Brushed cotton and certain napped materials could ignite from a stray spark, a nearby candle, or an innocent space heater and go up in seconds, and one particularly notorious style of fuzzy sweater earned the grim nickname of the torch sweater for exactly that reason. A law had been passed in 1953 to ban the very worst offenders, which tells you just how bad the worst offenders were. So the little ones are tucked in, warm and soft and dreaming, wrapped snugly in the most flammable thing in the house, except for the tree downstairs. The trouble lies in the very quality that makes these fabrics so appealing. Flannel and other brush materials are soft because they are napped, their surface teased up into a fine fuzz of loose fibres that feels wonderful against the skin. That fuzz traps warmth beautifully, which is exactly why you want it on a child on a cold night. It also presents an enormous amount of surface area to the open air, a fine dry down of fibre ends just waiting for a spark, and that is precisely the arrangement that makes a material catch fast and burn quick. The napped sweater was the most infamous example, and it earned its terrible nickname honestly. A brushed sweater with a long fuzzy pile could, if it brushed against a flame, ignite not like ordinary cloth, but in a sudden sheet, the flame racing across the fuzzy surface in an instant, and engulfing the whole garment before the wearer could react. People called it a torch sweater because that is what it became. A person turned briefly into a torch, and the phrase stuck because the phenomenon was real and horrifying and happened often enough to be named. Now, place that fabric in the house we have been touring all night, and the danger multiplies. This is a home full of open flames and heat sources sitting out in the living space. There are candles on the mantel and the Christmas table. There is the space heater glowing in the den. There are the burners on the stove, the pilot lights, the fireplace, the cigarette lighters lying on every side table. A child in fuzzy pajamas or a napped sweater moves through a world dotted with ignition sources, and it takes only one moment of contact, one lean too close to the heater, one reach across a candle, for the soft, warm fabric to become something else. The particular cruelty is that it is the children who are dressed this way, because it is the children you most want to keep warm and cosy at night. The softest, fuzziest, most flammable garments in the house are reserved for the smallest and least careful members of the family, the ones most likely to wander near the heater or the stove, the ones least able to react quickly or to smother a flame once it starts. You dress them in fire hazard specifically as an act of tenderness. This scale of the problem is best measured by the response to it, because the government does not usually ban clothing on a whim. A federal law arrived in 1953 specifically to outlaw the most dangerously flammable fabrics from being sold as wearing apparel, which is a remarkable thing for a nation to have to legislate. When your country passes a statute declaring that clothing should not, as a rule, burst into flame, you may safely conclude that a good deal of it had been doing exactly that. So the children are tucked in, soft and warm and beloved, wrapped in the cosiest and most combustible thing the closet holds. And on the floor of that same bedroom sits a treasure chest of smaller hazards, each one sized perfectly for little hands. On the floor of the bedroom sits the toy box, a treasure chest of small delights and modest hazards. Many of the toys are painted in bright, glossy colours, and that paint, like everything else in the house, is often full of lead, which is a problem because toys exist primarily to be chewed. The tin toys are stamped from thin metal with edges sharp enough to open an envelope or a fingertip. There are marbles and tiny parts perfectly sized for tiny windpipes, and not a single warning label among them. The toys are wonderful, Genuinely, some of the best ever made. They were simply designed in an age that assumed children were far more durable than they actually turned out to be. Begin with the paint, since we've met it everywhere else in the house, and it would be strange for it to skip the nursery. Toys of this era are painted in bright, glossy, saturated colours to catch a child's eye, and the pigments and paints that produced those cheerful colours were frequently full of lead, just like the walls and the trim. The difference is that a windowsill is at least meant to be looked at, whereas a toy is meant to be handled, sucked, gnawed, and gummed, which is the entire natural relationship between a small child and any small object. A painted wooden block or a bright tin figure goes straight into the mouth, which is exactly where you would least want the lead to be. Then there is the matter of edges, because a great many of the finest toys are made of tin, stamped and folded from thin sheet metal into wonderfully detailed cars or robots and wind-up animals. They are marvels of design and genuinely lovely to play with, and the thin metal they are made from carries edges and seams that can be surprisingly sharp. A rough spot on a stamped tin toy, or an edge exposed when a child inevitably bends or breaks it, can open a small hand as neatly as a blade. The toy does not have to be broken to bite, though breaking it certainly helps. Size is its own quiet danger, and one the era gave almost no thought to. The toy box is full of marbles, jacks, little metal accessories, and countless small removable parts, all of them beautiful and all of them sized with uncanny precision to lodge in a young child's throat. There is no concept yet of the choking hazard warning, no small parts caution printed on the box, no separate line of toys designed for the very young. A toy meant for an older child and a toddler determined to put things in his mouth share the same bedroom floor, and the toddler does not read the age recommendation, partly because he cannot and partly because there is not one. And that is the theme that ties the whole toy box together, the total absence of the warnings and standards that a modern parent takes for granted. There is no label listing the materials, no notice about lead in the paint, no age grade, no choking warning, no safety testing seal. The toys were made to be delightful and durable and inexpensive, and by those measures many of them succeeded brilliantly, becoming beloved classics that people still treasure. Safety, in the modern sense, simply was not part of the design brief, because the assumptions about what a child could survive were far more generous than the truth. So the toy box sits open on the bedroom floor, brimming with painted, sharp-edged, bite-sized delights, every one of them a genuine joy and a quiet little hazard at the same time. It is childhood in miniature, wonderful and slightly perilous, exactly like the house it lives in. And for the older children, past the age of blocks and marbles, the toy of choice is something far more ambitious, a kit that promised to turn the bedroom into a working laboratory. But the crown jewel of the toy collection belongs to the older children, and it is a chemistry set, or if the family is truly on the cutting edge, an atomic energy lab. The chemistry set comes stocked with genuinely reactive chemicals, the kind that can burn, stain, poison, or occasionally explode, all in the name of wholesome educational fun. And for a brief, glorious, deeply unwise window in the early 1950s, one company sold a toy laboratory that included real samples of radioactive uranium ore and a working Geiger counter, so that a child could measure actual radiation on the living room rug. It was marketed as inspiring the scientist of tomorrow. It was also, quite literally, a box of radioactive material with a price tag and a cheerful cardboard lid. The chemistry set is a beloved and genuinely wonderful gift, and it is easy to see why. It comes in a handsome case that opens to reveal rows of little bottles, a rack of test tubes, a small burner, and a manual full of experiments, and it promises a child the thrilling grown-up power of real science at the kitchen table. Many a future chemist, doctor and engineer got their first spark of wonder from exactly one of these kits, and that is a real and lovely thing. It is also, by modern standards, an astonishing thing to hand a 10-year-old and walk away from. The reason it inspired so much wonder is that the chemicals inside were real and reactive, not the tame, inert substitutes a modern set would contain. There were compounds that could produce genuine fire, smoke and colour changes, acids that could burn skin and etch surfaces, salts that were poisonous if swallowed, and combinations that could, in the right hands or the wrong ones, produce a small explosion. A curious and clever child following the manual learned real chemistry, and a curious and clever child ignoring the manual to see what happens if I mix these two learned something too, occasionally the hard way. The little burner provided the open flame to make all of it more exciting. And then there is the truly legendary entry, the Atomic Energy Lab, which stands as perhaps the single most remarkable object in this entire tour of a dangerous house. In the early 1950s, a toy company genuinely sold a kit intended to teach children about the exciting new world of nuclear energy, and it did not use models or pictures. It included actual samples of radioactive uranium ore, an actual working Geiger counter to detect radiation, and a manual encouraging the young scientist to conduct real experiments with the real radioactive material spread out on the floor of his bedroom. The intent behind it was, to be fair, sincere and even idealistic. This was the dawn of the atomic age, and there was tremendous optimism about nuclear power and a real desire to inspire the next generation to understand it. The kit was expensive and educational and marketed to the brightest, most ambitious young minds, the scientists of tomorrow. It simply carried that noble goal to a conclusion that sounds, to modern ears, completely deranged, which was to mail radioactive ore directly to children. It did not sell especially well, being costly, and it quietly vanished from shelves, becoming a legend precisely because it is so hard to believe it was ever real. So the older child unwraps his chemistry set, or, in the rarest and most extraordinary households, his personal atomic laboratory, thrilled beyond measure, and settles in to conduct real experiments with real, reactive and occasionally radioactive materials, entirely unsupervised on the bedroom rug. It is the toy box grown up, wonder and hazard bound together in a handsome case. And downstairs, in a corner of the basement, some families built a room devoted to a much larger fear, one that would introduce a hazard of its very own. Back downstairs, in a corner of the basement, some families have built the ultimate symbol of 1950s peace of mind, the fallout shelter. It is a cramped concrete room stocked with canned food, jugs of water, a radio, and the quiet hope that a nuclear war can be waited out behind a thick enough door. Children practice ducking and covering at school, and the whole family knows the drill for the end of the world. Meanwhile, that same sealed underground room, snug against the earth, is an excellent place for radon gas to gather, a naturally radioactive vapour rising up out of the soil that nobody has thought to worry about yet. The shelter was built to protect the family from radiation. In a small, ironic way, it was quietly supplying some of its own. To understand the fallout shelter, you have to feel the mood of the era, because the fear behind it was entirely real. This is a time of genuine dread about nuclear war, a fear woven so deeply into daily life that school children regularly practice ducking under their desks and covering their heads, as though a wooden desk might help. Families are encouraged to prepare, to make a plan, to build a place to survive the unthinkable, and for those with the means and the yard, that meant a shelter of their own, a sealed room to ride out the aftermath of a bomb. The shelter itself is a sober little space, and building one is an act of real love and real anxiety. It is a small room of thick concrete, sometimes buried in the backyard and sometimes tucked into a corner of the basement, sealed as tightly as possible against the outside world. Inside, the family stocks the essentials for survival: shelves of canned food, jugs of stored water, a battery radio to hear news of a world that may no longer exist, blankets, medicine, and the grim patience to wait behind a heavy door until someone declared it safe to come out. The intention could not be more protective. Every bit of it is designed to shield the family from radiation, to put concrete and earth between the people inside and the fallout drifting outside, to keep loved ones alive through a catastrophe. It is arguably the purest expression of care in the whole house, a room built for no reason other than to keep the family breathing when everything else has failed. And it works, at least in concept, against the danger it was built for. The irony, and there is always an irony, lives in the very design that makes it protective. A shelter is sealed tight and pressed against the earth, and the earth in many places naturally gives off radon, a colourless, odourless, radioactive gas that seeps up out of the soil and rock. In an open, ventilated house, radon disperses and mostly stays low. In a sealed underground room built to keep the outside air out, radon has a tendency to accumulate, gathering quietly in exactly the enclosed, earth-hugging space the family built for safety. The room made to guard against radiation becomes a fine collector of a radiation source of its own. Nobody knows this yet, of course, because radon in homes is not something anyone is thinking about in the 1950s, and the amount gathering in a shelter that is only occupied during drills is a modest hazard compared to the war it was built to survive. But there is something quietly telling about it. This room built out of fear of radiation that busies itself, concentrating a little radiation on its own. So the shelter waits in the basement, stocked and sealed and ready for a day everyone dreads, protecting the family from one invisible danger while gently hosting another. And speaking of enclosed spaces full of fumes, let us step out to the garage, where the family keeps its proudest possession and a great deal else besides. Out in the attached garage sits the family's pride and joy, the automobile, and the garage is its own special pocket of hazard. The car runs on leaded gasoline, misting a fine spray of lead into the air every time the engine turns over, and people warm the car up with the garage door shut on cold mornings, flooding the space with exhaust. Along the shelves sit open cans of paint, turpentine, solvents, more DDT, and assorted mystery liquids in unlabelled jars, all off-gassing gently in the enclosed heat. The car itself has no seat belts, because those are considered unnecessary and faintly insulting to a competent driver. The garage is where the family keeps everything flammable, everything toxic, and the 2-ton machine they climb into without a single restraint. Start with the fuel, because it carries our old companion into a brand new place. The gasoline of this era is leaded, dosed with a lead compound to make the engine run more smoothly, and every time that fuel burns, it sends a fine mist of lead out into the air through the exhaust. This is happening everywhere cars run, along every street and highway, settling into the soil and dust of every city. But it is most concentrated right here in the enclosed garage where the engine coughs to life each morning. The family breathes a little of it every time they start the car, and the whole neighbourhood breathes a lot of it all the time. The classic garage mistake makes the exhaust far more dangerous than a whiff of lead. On a cold morning, it is only sensible to warm the car up before driving, and it is only comfortable to do that without standing out in the cold. So people start the engine with the garage door still closed and sit in the warming car, or step back into the house to finish their coffee. The exhaust, full of the carbon monoxide we have already met down at the furnace, pours into the sealed garage and fills it invisibly. An enclosed garage with a running engine is one of the most reliable ways to generate a lethal amount of the gas, and here it is done as a matter of morning routine. Then there are the shelves, which turn the garage into a warehouse of hazards beyond the car. This is where the household stores everything too dangerous, too smelly, or too flammable for the house proper, which is a considerable inventory. There are open cans of paint, and the lead-based paint we keep meeting, Cans of turpentine and paint thinner, jars of gasoline, bottles of solvents, containers of the DDT the family sprays so freely, motor oil, cleaning chemicals, and the inevitable unlabeled jars of liquids nobody quite remembers, all of them gently releasing fumes into the warm enclosed air. It is a chemical storeroom kept a door away from the kitchen, and the car at the centre of it all offers its passengers essentially no protection once they climb inside. Seatbelts are not standard equipment, and where they exist at all they are widely ignored or refused, dismissed as unnecessary fuss or as an insult to a driver's skill. There are no airbags, no padded dashboards to speak of, no crumple zones, none of the safety engineering a modern car takes for granted. The interior is a hard landscape of metal and glass, and in a crash the occupants are simply thrown against it. The 2-ton machine is built to go fast and look magnificent, and it is not much built to keep the people inside it alive when something goes wrong. So the garage stands there attached to the house, a snug enclosed room housing an engine that breathes out poison, shelves that breathe out fumes, and a beloved machine that carries the family down the road with nothing holding them in their seats. It is the most concentrated collection of hazards on the property, all gathered lovingly around the car. And directly overhead, in the quiet space beneath the roof, waits one more surprise, poured loose between the rafters and shedding softly into every room below. Climb up into the attic now, into that hushed, dusty space beneath the roof where the insulation lives. Poured between the joists is a loose, pebbly, greyish material that looks a bit like gravel and pours like breakfast cereal, and it is called vermiculite, sold under a friendly brand name and packed into millions of American attics. It is lightweight, fireproof, and a marvellous insulator. It is also, thanks to the particular mine most of it came from, thoroughly contaminated with asbestos. Every time someone crawls up to store the Christmas decorations or fetch a suitcase, they stir up a little cloud of it, and it drifts down through the ceiling gaps into the rooms below. The attic is silent, still, and quietly shedding its secret into the house. Vermiculite is, on its own merits, a genuinely useful material, and it is easy to see why it filled so many attics. It's a natural mineral that puffs up when heated into lightweight, pebbly granules, and those granules trap air beautifully, making them an excellent insulator that also happens to be fireproof and easy to install. You simply pour it out of the bag and let it settle loose between the ceiling joists. No cutting, no fitting, no fuss. It flows like cereal into every gap and corner, and it does its insulating job quietly for decades. The problem is not vermiculite itself, but where the vast majority of it came from, which is the recurring bad luck at the heart of so many of tonight's hazards. Most of the vermiculite sold in America came from a single enormous mine, and that particular mine happened to sit in ground naturally laced with asbestos, so the vermiculite dug out of it came up contaminated with asbestos fibres mixed right in. The friendly bags of loose-fill insulation, sold under a trusted brand name and poured into millions of homes, carried that contamination with them into every attic they filled. And so, the attic becomes yet another chamber in this house, where asbestos waits, this time not sealed into a tile or a ceiling texture but lying loose and exposed by the cubic foot. The one rule of asbestos, that it is only dangerous when disturbed and its fibres set loose into the air, meets a material that is loose to begin with, a pile of granules that shifts and puffs at the lightest touch. Every granule that gets nudged, poured, or brushed sends up a little of its contamination, and there is a great deal of it up there, spread across the whole footprint of the house. An attic is not a room anyone lives in, which helps, but it is a room people visit more than they realise. It is where the family stores everything it owns but does not currently need. The Christmas decorations, the luggage, the boxes of old clothes, the things saved for someday. Someone climbs up there to stow the ornaments in January and fetch them again in December, to grab a suitcase before a trip, to hunt for a box in the dim light. And every one of those visits means crawling and kneeling and shifting boxes across the loose fill, stirring up a little cloud each time. Worse still, the attic connects to the rooms below through countless small gaps around light fixtures and ceiling seams, so the disturbed fibres do not stay politely upstairs. They drift down into the living space. So the attic keeps its quiet vigil beneath the roof, still and dusty and full of the family's saved-up memories, insulated warmly and cheaply by a loose grey material, shedding its hidden contamination with every visit. It is asbestos in its most casual and least suspected form, poured out by the bagful and forgotten. And back down in the bedroom, tucked into the closet the family opens every single day, waits a hazard that announces itself proudly, with a smell everyone has been trained to trust. Open the bedroom closet and inhale, and you will be met with the unmistakable, eye-watering aroma of mothballs. These small white spheres are tucked into every drawer, pocket and coat, to keep the moths from feasting on the wool, and they work by slowly evaporating a cloud of naphthalene, a toxic chemical, directly into the enclosed air you then wear all day. The smell is considered clean, even wholesome, the honest perfume of a well-kept home. To a small child, the little white balls look remarkably like candy, or at least like a lovely thing to suck on, which is a mistake that happened often enough to keep doctors busy. The closet smells like protection. It is really the smell of a pesticide quietly doing its work. The moth problem is real, which is why the mothball is everywhere. In a household full of wool suits, wool coats, wool sweaters, and wool blankets, clothes moths are a genuine and expensive nuisance, their larvae chewing holes through the family's good garments, while they hang forgotten in the closet. The mothball is the trusted defence, small and cheap and easy, tucked into every pocket and drawer and hung in little bags among the coats, and it works well enough that no proper household would store its woolens without a generous supply of them. The way it works is the part worth pausing on. A mothball is a solid ball of naphthalene, or a related chemical, that slowly sublimates, turning directly from a solid into a vapour without ever passing through a liquid, so it steadily fills the enclosed space around it with a cloud of pesticide gas. That gas is what kills the moths and their larvae, and that same gas is what the family breathes in every time they open the closet, and it is what soaks into the very clothes being protected. The smell that clings to a coat pulled from storage is the pesticide itself, worn out into the world and breathed all day long. That smell, and this is the strange part, is beloved. It has been so thoroughly associated with clean, well-kept, moth-free clothing that people came to regard it as a pleasant and wholesome scent, the smell of a tidy home and a careful housekeeper. A garment that reeked of mothballs was not off-putting but reassuring, proof that it had been stored properly and protected from pests. The household breathed in a toxic vapour, and, through long familiarity, learned to file it under the comforting smells of home, right alongside baking bread and fresh laundry. The sharpest danger, as so often in this house, falls on the smallest members of the family. A mothball is a small, round, smooth, white sphere, and to a young child that is not a pesticide, that is a treat, indistinguishable at a glance from a piece of candy or a gumball. Children found them in coat pockets and drawers and little hanging bags, and did what children do with small round white things, which is put them in their mouths. Swallowing a mothball is a genuine poisoning, and it happened frequently enough that treating it was a familiar task for the doctors and hospitals of the day. So the closet stands there, opened and reached into every single morning, breathing out its clean, beloved chemical smell over the clothes and the family alike. The little white spheres standing guard in every pocket and disguised as candy to any child who finds them. It is protection and poison wearing the same wholesome perfume. And down in the kitchen, on the shelves of the pantry, waits one more collection of everyday provisions with a hidden edge, this time hiding inside the food itself. Into the pantry, where the shelves are lined with the miracle of modern convenience, canned food, rows and rows of it, promising a hot meal in any season. Most of it is perfectly fine. Some of it is not, because home canning done carelessly can breed botulism, one of the most lethal toxins on Earth, hiding silently in a jar of green beans that looks and smells completely normal. And the commercial cans themselves are frequently sealed with lead solder, a bright seam of lead running right along the inside of the tin, leaching gently into the peaches and the soup. The pantry is a monument to abundance and preparedness. It is also, on an unlucky day, a very quiet way for dinner to go badly wrong. The pantry deserves its pride of place, because canned and preserved food genuinely transformed the household. It meant a family could eat vegetables in the dead of winter, keep a deep reserve against hard times, and put a hot meal on the table from the shelf in minutes. Home canning was a point of pride and thrift, a skill passed down and practiced every harvest, jars of beans and tomatoes and fruit, put up by the dozen and lined proudly on the cellar shelves. Most of it was wholesome, delicious, and a real triumph of a well-run home. The danger in home canning is subtle and comes down to technique, which is what makes it so treacherous. Certain low-acid foods, green beans prominent among them, can harbour the bacterium that produces botulism toxin if they are not processed at a high enough temperature to kill its spores. Botulism is among the most lethal poisons known, and the truly frightening part is that a jar harbouring it usually gives no warning at all. It does not necessarily look spoiled or smell off or taste wrong. The contaminated beans can appear perfectly normal on the plate, which means the only defence is careful, correct processing that not every kitchen managed every time. Then there is the commercial can itself, which carries a more familiar poison in a place you would never think to look. Many cans of this era are sealed along their seams with lead solder, and that solder is not tucked safely on the outside but runs right along the interior seam in direct contact with the food inside. Over time, and especially with acidic contents like tomatoes, fruit and juices, the food draws lead out of that solder seam and into itself. So the canned peaches and the canned soup and the canned tomatoes come with a faint, unadvertised seasoning of lead, dissolved quietly out of the very seam that holds the can together. Both of these dangers share the quality that has run through this entire house, which is that they are invisible and give no honest warning. The botulism hides in a jar that looks fine, and the lead dissolves unseen and untasted into the fruit. A family looking at the pantry sees only abundance, shelves stocked deep against hunger and winter, a comforting picture of a household well provided for. There is no way, looking at those rows of jars and cans, to pick out the one that was processed a few degrees too cool, or to see the lead migrating slowly out of a bright metal seam. So the pantry stands stocked and reassuring, a monument to a family's foresight and thrift, most of its provisions genuinely wholesome, and a very few of them quietly wrong in ways no one can see, smell, or taste. It is the danger of the whole house distilled into the food itself, hazard hiding in the very act of nourishment. And as the day winds down and the grown-ups settle in to relax, the elegance of the evening carries its own trace of the same old metal, poured this time into the finest glass in the house. As evening settles in, it is time for the grown-ups to unwind, and nothing says sophistication like the cut crystal decanter on the sideboard, catching the lamplight and cradling the good brandy. That crystal sparkles so beautifully because it is leaded crystal, glass made with a generous helping of lead oxide, and when you store an acidic spirit inside it for weeks or months, the liquor slowly draws the lead out of the glass and into the drink. So the more refined the household, the finer the crystal, and the more elegantly it seasons every nightcap with a trace of heavy metal. Nobody knows this yet, of course. They simply pour another, admire the way the light dances through the facets, and toast to their good health. Leaded crystal is genuinely gorgeous, and its beauty is the whole reason for its existence. Adding lead oxide to glass makes it heavier, softer, and more brilliant, so it bends the light more dramatically and can be cut into those deep sparkling facets that catch the lamplight and throw it back in little rainbows. It rings with a clear musical tone when you tap it. It is the material of the finest decanters, wine glasses, tumblers, and serving pieces, the crystal a proud household brings out for guests and keeps displayed on the good shelf. The more lead in the glass, the more brilliant and prized it is. The trouble is exactly the lead that makes it beautiful, and the trouble is worst in precisely the piece designed for long-term storage. A cut crystal decanter is meant to hold spirits, brandy or whiskey or sherry, sitting on the sideboard for weeks and months, decanted from the bottle into something more elegant to look at, and those spirits are mildly acidic, and acid, as we have learned again and again tonight, patiently draws lead out of whatever holds it. The longer the brandy sits in the beautiful decanter, the more lead it quietly leaches from the crystal, so a spirit stored for months in a fine decanter can carry a genuinely meaningful dose. The wine glasses and tumblers do their smaller part too, because even a drink poured into a leaded crystal glass and consumed over an evening picks up a trace on its way to the lips. It is a smaller exposure than the long marinade in the decanter, but it is real, and it happens with the household's finest and most frequently admired glassware. Every toast raised in the good crystal is, in a tiny measure, a toast taken with a whisper of lead, poured from a decanter that has been concentrating it for months. There is a familiar and bitter symmetry in it, the same one that has haunted this whole house. The refinement is the hazard. The more sophisticated and well-appointed the home, the finer its crystal, and the finer its crystal, the more lead it contains and the more elegantly it seasons every drink. A humble household drinking from plain glass tumblers is, in this one respect, safer than the elegant one raising heavy-cut crystal by candlelight. Good taste, quite literally, comes at a cost, measured out drink by drink from the very glass chosen to display it. And of course nobody at the sideboard has the faintest idea, which is what makes the scene so quietly poignant. They see only beauty and occasion, the lamplight dancing in the facets, the amber spirit glowing in the decanter, the pleasant ritual of a drink at the end of a long day. They pour, they clink the lovely glasses together, and they wish one another good health, entirely sincere, entirely unaware. So the cocktail hour glows on, refined and warm and gently laced, the finest object on the sideboard doing its slow, quiet work. And now, at last, let us step back and take in the whole picture, the entire family gathered in one warm room at the close of the day. And now, at last, picture the whole family gathered in the living room at the end of the day. Father reclines with a cigarette and a leaded crystal glass. Mother presses a shirt on the asbestos pad. The children play on the lead-painted floor with their faintly radioactive toy. The glowing clock ticks on the mantel. The furnace breathes below. The wallpaper hums with pesticide, and the television casts its warm flicker over all of it. Everyone is happy. Everyone is comfortable. Everyone is home. This is the great secret of the 1950s house. It was not haunted by ghosts or monsters or anything you could ever see. It was simply built, decorated and stocked from top to bottom by people who did not yet know what they were living inside. And somehow, against every bit of it, most of them made it through just fine. Take a slow look around this room, because it is the whole tour gathered into a single peaceful scene. Every hazard we have wandered past tonight is here at once, arranged not as a horror show but as an ordinary happy evening. The smoke drifts, the crystal glints, the clock glows, the furnace hums, the walls off gas, the floor sheds, the pad frays, and the family sits in the middle of all of it, warm and content and entirely at ease. Nothing in the room looks the least bit dangerous because nothing in the room is trying to look dangerous. It is just home. And that is the point worth sitting with, the thread that has run beneath every single segment tonight. Not one of these dangers announced itself. There was no warning label, no alarm, no smell of trouble, no visible menace. The lead was in the prettiest paint and the finest crystal. The asbestos was in the thing that protected against fire. The radiation was in the loveliest dishes and the most magical glowing clock. The poison was in the healthy cigarette, the protective wallpaper, the clean-smelling closet. Over and over the hazard hid inside the comfort, the safety feature, the mark of good taste. It is easy, from a modern armchair, to look back at all of this and feel superior, to shake your head at people who painted their nurseries with pesticide and mailed uranium to children. But that would be missing the real and rather humbling lesson. These were not careless people or foolish ones. They were doing their sincere best with the knowledge they had, trusting the doctors on the page, the labels on the cans, the products on the shelves, exactly as we trust the knowledge and the products of our own time. They did not know, because nobody had told them yet, and much of the telling would take decades to arrive. Which raises the quiet, slightly uncomfortable question this whole tour has been circling. If the 1950s home was full of dangers its occupants could not see, arranged all around them and disguised as comfort and safety and good taste, then what exactly is sitting in the perfectly ordinary rooms we live in now? Some future narrator, wandering through a house of today, may well find a scene just as cosy and just as quietly hazardous, and marvel that we lived among it so peacefully, never suspecting a thing. The house is always most dangerous in the places we have been taught to trust, but there is a gentler truth here too, and it is worth ending on. For all of it, for the smoke and the metal and the fibres and the fumes, the family in this living room mostly came through. They grew up, they grew old, they raised their own children, they told stories about the good glowing clock and the beloved bright dishes. Human beings are strange and stubborn and durable, and they have a long history of surviving the very homes they built with love and no idea. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed in your own house, breathe easy, more or less, and let the ordinary comforts of your ordinary rooms carry you gently off to sleep. So there you have it. One quiet evening in a 1950s home, where the walls were poison, the dishes glowed, the clock ticked away in soft radioactive green, and the healthiest cigarette in the house came with a filter made of something best kept out of a lung. You survived it. You breathed the blue haze, sipped from the leaded crystal, slept beneath the humming wallpaper, and somehow made it through to morning, which, as it turns out, is exactly what most of them did. And that is the thing worth carrying off to sleep with you tonight. The people who actually lived in these houses were not reckless or foolish. They were doing their level best with the knowledge they had, trusting the labels and the doctors and the bright shiny promises of a brand new modern age, loving their families and building warm homes around them with no idea at all what was tucked inside the paint and the pipes and the pretty red plates. They laughed, they raised children, they told stories around the glowing clock, and most of them came through just fine, stubborn and hopeful and durable the way people always somehow are. So tonight, as you settle into your own clean bed, in your own quiet room, with your smoke-free air and your unleaded water, and your entirely non-radioactive alarm clock, maybe whisper a small thank you to the ones who came before. They lived surrounded by invisible dangers they could not see and did not fear, and they carried us here anyway, one ordinary evening at a time. Rest easy now. Let your shoulders sink. Let the day go. The house is quiet, the air is clear, and there is nothing at all glowing on the nightstand. Good night.